Hi, hello everyone. Our next speaker, Ed Kloza, will be discussing how to prepare for your geneticist appointment. Ed is a genetics consultant to the New England Regional Genetics and has extensive experience in genetic education of primary care clinicians and the general public. He is past president of the National Society of Genetic Counselors, past editor of Perspectives in Genetic Counseling, and served on the editorial board of the Journal of Genetic Counseling. He co-founded the American Board of Genetic Counseling and received the Natalie Weissberger National Achievement Award in 2000. Thank you for joining us today, Ed.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for reminding me of my illustrious career. I've been a genetic counselor since 1975, so that kind of tips you off to how long I've been around. Although I got to admit that for the past few years, I have not been involved directly in genetic counseling, but my interests have taken me elsewhere. I was the president of the National Society of Genetic Counselors, and the only reason I mention that is because I had commissioned a committee to develop what I call the Bill of Rights for people seeking genetic counseling. I wanted to document what folks who were going to experience genetic counseling, what they should expect, how they should be treated, and kind of lay down a standard. It was beautifully crafted, but our attorney said, don't publish it because somebody somewhere will use that against a genetic counselor in court. But I decided to resurrect that recently and use the elements that the committee had put together to develop a presentation that is instructional and hopefully can be useful to many of you folks that are attending. I imagine that a lot of you have already been to a medical geneticist or a genetic counselor, to a genetics clinic. Some of you may not have been, some of you may be scheduled and are kind of preparing to go. But whatever the situation, what I hope to do is to help people feel more comfortable with the visit, because any visit to any medical specialist is often accompanied by anxiety. And if you know what you can expect from the visit and what they're going to be expecting from you, that it might kind of make the visit more efficient, more pleasant, more satisfactory for everyone. So first of all, who are geneticists? If you don't already know, they're members of the healthcare team who deal not only with the medical, clinical aspects of genetic conditions, but, and this is especially true for genetic counselors, they're trained to deal with the psychosocial, the emotional aspects of the impact of genetic disorders on a family. And genetic conditions or genetic disorders are ones that we typically know as those that kind of run in the family. They've been inherited or could be inherited, and they could be passed on. But sometimes they're not. But they're caused by changes in DNA and the genetic material, and it's the DNA in all of us that determines how we're formed in the womb, how we grow, and how we keep healthy. So if you've been to a geneticist or are scheduled to be going to a genetics center or a clinic, why are you being referred there? Well, it's very likely that your provider or your child's provider, healthcare provider, is interested in knowing if, in fact, the concerns and symptoms that are evident in your child, are they genetic? Is this due to a condition that has been inherited or could be passed on? And some genetic conditions arise out of the blue, and that your child may be the first person in the family showing it, but it's important to identify it as a genetic condition because treatments are different, management is different, etc. Some conditions are fairly well known. Fragile X has been studied for years and years and years. An awful lot is known about it, and it's fairly common. And I think this pertains more to the folks attending this conference. A lot of these conditions are very, very rare. There may be 1,000, 100, a half dozen people in the world that are known to have it. And the more you understand about these rare conditions, the better off everyone experiencing it will be. Sometimes specialized genetic testing can be helpful. And I know that earlier in the day, Dr. Michelle Spencer-Manzon was talking about genome testing, and the genetic testing has advanced so much in the past several years and is likely to advance even more that primary care physicians, pediatricians, it's difficult for them to keep up with everything going on in genetics because there's so many other things going on in their fields. And so they have to kind of stay on top of everything. And they know that if something comes up and they're concerned about genetics, send the folks to a genetic center. What type of treatment is available? Are there others with a similar condition whose support and experience might be helpful? This is near and dear to my heart because I've come to know over the past few years what used to be called family support groups and now are called family-led organizations like Family Voices, Rare New England, and Parent to Parent. These are folks who are living the experience, who are living with the challenges, living with the triumphs of dealing with kids with genetic conditions or with similar symptoms. Again, with rare conditions, you may not find anyone else in your community with a similar, the same condition, but the symptoms can be similar. Kids with behavioral problems, no matter what the cause, their families can benefit from networking with other families whose kids have behavioral problems. They can be the source of tremendous amounts of insight and help. Well, so if you've got an appointment with a genetics clinic, who's likely to be seen and where are you likely to be seen? Well, sometimes they may say, look, we want you to bring in the child that's of concern to this physician or to the situation. Sometimes they say, you know what, can you bring in, we understand you've got 2 other kids. We would like to see them, examine them and just kind of see if there are any clues with other family members that might tip us off as to what's going on with your child. If you want to bring in a support person or a friend, someone to help you deal with the amount of information and to someone that you trust that would be helpful, those folks are typically welcome as well. Back in the pre-COVID days, it wouldn't be unusual for you to come into a medical center that's got a department of genetics that's got 6 or 8 people on staff providing genetics support and expertise. Sometimes these large centers would send a couple of people out to a local community hospital once a month or once every 6 weeks so that folks from the towns, 50 or 60 miles away only have to travel a few minutes to the community hospital and not come into the big city. But more and more now, since the spring, these visits are taking place remotely via computer-assisted systems, just as we're talking now. And this is telegenetics. A year ago, telegenetics was kind of a niche thing, a novelty, and now it's kind of the default way for people to be seen. I have to bring up that medical genetics, like any other medical specialty, it's a specialized health service. It can be expensive, and there are costs associated with it. Testing and other, if x-rays, MRIs, other things are needed, lab work, these things can add up as well. Insurance tends to pick up quite a bit, and the insurance companies are being educated about the need and the utility of genetic services and genetic testing. Sometimes public or private funds may cover things. Labs may have a fund set aside to help folks who are financially unable to cover the cost of some of the tests. But no matter what, there's going to be some out-of-pocket expense, so cost has got to be mentioned here somewhere. Now, as you're preparing for your visit to a genetics center or a genetics clinic, there are some things that you can do to, again, make it a more efficient visit. And if you need help, if you've got a support person, you've got a friend, you've got a family member that you can rely on to help you with this, don't hesitate to ask them. One thing is, make sure you understand why your child is being referred to a genetic center. The child's physician may have his or her own reasons for sending you to the clinic. You have your reasons, and they can be different. I wouldn't be surprised if they weren't different, but as long as you understand why you're going, then you can make sure, and the physician, the clinician, can make sure that everyone does their best to get their questions answered. You're going to have a lot of questions, and like with any medical specialty, the best thing to do is, as questions come up before the meeting, write them down. Don't rely on your memory, because when you get in there, it's going to get hectic and you're going to forget things. So write your questions down beforehand, and then find out from the genetics center what they need from you before the meeting. Are there questionnaires that need to be filled out? Are there release forms? Are there confidentiality forms that need to be signed? What do they need? What do you need to bring? Do you need to bring lab records, x-rays? Do you need to bring whatever? Find out. And if they should be telling you this ahead of time, but don't hesitate to ask if you've got questions. You may want to know who you're scheduled to meet with. Is it a particular physician? Is it going to be a team? Is it going to be a genetic counselor? They may or may not know, because if the meeting is months ahead, they don't know who's going to be on staff that day or who's going to be available that day. But you may want to just ask so that you can have kind of a heads up of who you expect to see when you go in. If students, and this is not unusual, they may say, look, we've got some medical students or genetic counseling students that would like to sit in on this session, whether it's in person or by video. Would you mind? It's really up to you. Allowing these folks to sit in is helpful to them. It helps their training. They get to meet you. They get to see and hear what your challenges are, what your issues are, and how the clinicians deal with them. It's very helpful if these folks can sit in. It's part of their training. They're going to be more effective when they get out into the world offering these services. But in the end, if you feel uncomfortable with anyone else being there, just tell them that you prefer not to have anyone. And if you would like to bring other people, let them know. Let them know if English isn't your second language. You can ask them to provide an interpreter, a medical interpreter. This is a professional medical interpreter. You might be tempted to bring your cousin, your brother, or somebody who knows your language and who knows English. If they're not professional medical interpreters, that's kind of discouraged for a number of reasons. They will provide someone who can be objective, who can make sure that what you're trying to convey to the clinician and the genetics team is conveyed without any other nuance added to it. And the same thing with information given to you is exactly what the genetics team is trying to tell you. And ask about costs, ask about coverage and payment plans. So now you're prepared. What happens when you actually get there? Well, undoubtedly you'll be asked about your medical history and family history. So it's kind of a good thing to start making notes of your family history, brothers and sisters, their kids, unusual symptoms, unusual disorders, early deaths. Keep track of that. The more precise you can be and accurate and up to date you can be, the better. probably be a physical exam of some sort, just so that the clinician, him or herself, can look for things that maybe the pediatrician wasn't looking for. You should be spoken to in a respectful way in a language that you understand. So again, don't hesitate to ask for an interpreter. If there's printed material in your language, ask for it. These clinics and folks have tons of material available. At 1 o'clock, Karen Voley from the New England Regional Genetics Network is going to be talking about the materials and resources specifically designed for success in schools. So that will be a very interesting discussion as well. You don't have to accept all of the testing that's being recommended. If you have the right to decline procedures, you have the right to decline testing. If similar, less expensive testing might be available, ask about it. This is your choice. You're the boss. You drive this. If the discussion's going into an area that you feel uncomfortable about, ask that you save that discussion for another day. You should expect that what you tell the genetics team and what they tell you is confidential. Your provider, or the person who referred you and referred your family, will have to be given information, obviously, on what was discussed. But unless you release it, it doesn't go anywhere else. If something's not clear, ask questions. If they can be answered, they will be. Sometimes the clinicians will be aware of clinical studies that are going on that might be useful or impact the condition that's being discussed with your child. If such research is appropriate, you'll be told about it. But again, you have the option to say yes or no. And if you say no or yes, it's not going to affect your care either from the clinical genetics team or from your primary care provider. Remember that some of the information you get might be useful to other family members. If this is a condition that is inherited and could be passed on through other members of the family, some of these folks may be interested in knowing. And the same thing, if it's a condition that's not likely to be passed on and there's no risk, they may want to know that as well. And so they get some type of relief regarding that. You should get a clearly written summary of what was discussed. You may not get it that day, you may not get it that week, but you probably will get something. You'll get a copy of the letter that was sent to your doctor, or you might get something written specifically for family. You'll have access to your medical records. You'll be able to view them if you desire to. Your beliefs, your cultural traditions, all of that should be respected by the genetics team. You shouldn't need to be concerned that because your ethnicity or your sexual orientation is not mainstream, that you'll be denied services. They should not. Any decision that you make is your decision regarding treatment, regarding testing, etc. And you should be supported in your decisions, and they should be respected. Now, don't be surprised if they say, we really haven't quite figured this out yet. We've eliminated a few ideas, but we'd like you to come back in 6 months or 3 months or whatever. And we can kind of give us some time to discuss this with our colleagues, give us some time to look into this, and and so one meeting is very unlikely. You may have to go back for more. You may be referred to other professionals, orthopods, neurologists, who knows, in order to help clarify the diagnosis and the treatment. So if those are going to be appropriate, they'll be made. If the clinic is aware of local and national family support groups, family-led organizations that can be helpful, providing support and information and reassurance between then and when you're going to see the clinic again, hopefully they will refer you. If not, there's ways again, through the New England Regional Genetics Network, to find these places and get some extra help. The search for the diagnosis can take a while. It may never be over, but that doesn't mean there isn't help out there for you. And if there are things that you're expected to do immediately after the meeting, go see a physical therapist or call so-and-so. They should let you do that. They should outline for you what your next steps are. If you have questions about anything that was said during the meeting, get in touch with the genetic counselor or whatever contact person they suggest, but you shouldn't have to stew about things that aren't clear. You follow up. If there are changes in your family or medical history, they may be important. So it could be useful to inform the genetic counselor if your cousin delivered a baby with a certain type of symptoms that are kind of similar to what your child has. Let them know. It could be nothing, but it could be important. Again, think about sharing information with relatives because it could be important for them. And if you've gone through the trouble of collecting a detailed family history, make sure that you allow your doctor to share it with others who might be seeking similar information. And if you want to know about new developments or share new information or contact the Genetics Center. The genetic counselors will be glad to hear from you, glad to bring you up to date on any new information they have. And finally, these important links and resources, the Family Voices, these are a national network of families that can provide exquisite help and support for families who have kids with challenges, and utilize them. www.familyvoices.org. Parent to Parent is another one. If you are looking for a genetic counselor in your area or in the particular field that of interest, the National Society of Genetic Counselors webpage has a Find a Genetic Counselor feature. There's the same thing with the American College of Medical Genetics and finding genetics clinics in your area or genetics clinics that specialize in certain conditions. And finally, the National Coordinating Center for the Regional Genetics Networks. If you move from New England to another part of the country and you want to kind of tie into their local genetics network, you should be able to find it. So thank you for listening to this segment. Again, I want to thank Judith Binkendorf and the group at the National Society of Genetic Counselors that worked so hard many years ago to come up with these ideas. If there are questions, I'd be happy to take them. Oh, you're muted, Caroline.
Yep,
There you go.
I realized that. Thank you so much. That was a lot of really great information. We do have a few questions from the audience. The first one is, for an appointment with a geneticist, would you advise a parent to bring the whole family or not?
It depends on the situation. And I sometimes bringing the whole family is going to be useful, but that may not happen until they have a chance to first look at the medical records, first look at the child. Again, I'm making assumptions that we're talking about kids. That is the child with a condition that has prompted the referral. Now, if you're talking about referring yourself to a geneticist rather than having a physician referred, then again, I would contact the center. I talk with a genetic counselor. They will guide you with some questions about what's going on, and then advise you on whether how many and who might want to be seen.
Great. The next question is, do most geneticists have a specific genetic counselor that works with them? Who should a patient contact first?
Yeah, it depends on It depends on the size of the practice. Smaller genetics practices, if it's one geneticist, there's probably one genetic counselor. In a large place like the UConn or Yale, they have several geneticists, and these geneticists may be specializing. Some might be in dysmorphology, kids are born with obvious birth defects. These are the folks that will take a look and say, I think I know what that is. There are metabolic geneticists, biochemical geneticists, molecular geneticists, pediatric geneticists, adult geneticists. So yeah, the genetic counselors are sometimes will be linked up to a specialty or linked up to a particular geneticist. But genetic counselors, and I clearly am biased in this regard, but they tend to have more time to spend with the families. They tend to take more time to spend with the families and to kind of identify what the family is really interested in finding out. And then they can kind of digest that and bring that to the geneticist and say, hey, I talked with a family today, and here's the situation, and here's what I think you may want to do. Can I get back to them and tell them we'll set them up for an appointment? Going through the genetic counselor tends to be easier than getting to the geneticist. That sometimes the route to a genetics clinic is, you've got to call the appointment secretary or whatever. It depends on how they all work.
Okay. The next question, what advice do you have for a hopeful future genetic counselor?
Oh boy. Well, when I start, you get me talking about, back in 1975, there were essentially two genetic counseling programs on the East Coast. There was one at Sarah Lawrence, which is the premier, the first, and it's kind of the grandmother of all genetic counseling programs, and Rutgers, which is where I went. And that program folded after a couple of years, and it has since made a comeback, and it's doing very, very well. But now there are like 50 genetic counseling programs, and there are more in development. The problem is there aren't enough genetic counselors to service the population of this country, as there are not enough medical geneticists. There are far fewer medical geneticists. So yes, if you are interested in a career in genetic counseling, I would suggest, getting your undergraduate degree should be in biology or psychology, maybe even education. They don't have to, not limited. And then get in touch, look around at the genetic counseling programs that they all have a different slant on, some have stressed a little bit more research, some might be more with population, some might be more with the counseling part of it versus the clinical part of it. Find something that looks like it's going to suit your values and your tastes, and talk to the folks there. Talk to counselors who have come out of those programs. Genetic counselors tend to like to talk, as I'm demonstrating right now. But once I get rolling, it's tough to stop me. Once you get some genetic counselor's ear, you'll get all the information you want.
Okay, we have one more question. We're cutting it a little close for time, but this is the last question. How do we find a geneticist to look at your private genetic testing? I purchased mine from Nebula Genomics.
Oh, great question. And yeah, these home genetic kits are kind of exploding all over the place. And the part of the problem is what they give you back for information can be limited, but some of these places test everything and all the data is there. You just need someone to figure it out. I haven't any personal direct experience with this, but I know that there are places you get on the internet and you put in something like interpreting home DNA test kits, and you're going to get all kinds of options. Some people do this for free. Some people charge. Be very, very careful about who you have analyze your stuff. And also remember that the testing, this type of testing, is not the same level of testing that you're likely to get when you're specifically looking for genetic changes because you're trying to make a diagnosis. These kind of, we'll test everybody, we'll test everything, can be very, very tricky, and just kind of take it with a grain of salt. You can send you can send your data to 6 different places and you'll get 6 different interpretations back. So just be very, very careful.
Thank you so much, Ed. We're going to wrap up now and head into the next session, but thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everyone for watching.
It